In May 1982, a small community in Ohio was shaken by a dark mystery. A simple man, respected by neighbors and friends, disappeared unexpectedly on what seemed to be just another ordinary Saturday. What looked like a routine workday ended up as one of the most disturbing criminal enigmas in rural America. Who could have wished for the death of someone known as honest and dedicated? And what motive could have turned the routine of a small-town handyman into tragedy? The most accepted answers point to three possible scenarios: indirect involvement with criminals linked to drug trafficking, mafia retaliation due to his brother's testimony, or rumors of a supposed extramarital affair. Each theory carries plausible elements, but none has ever been proven. Herman Gilbert, husband, father of four, and tireless worker, left home early on Saturday, May 22nd. Although he had mentioned to his wife that he didn't feel like working, he kept his repair routine. He was seen in Maysville, Kentucky, buying cigarettes and entering a flower shop, where he asked for a specific employee, claiming she knew what he wanted to order. This detail would later fuel speculation about his personal life. That afternoon, however, he never returned. Joanne, his wife, expected him home around 3 p.m., but time passed without any sign of him. Hours of worry turned into despair overnight, leading her to officially report him missing. The following day, a teenager found Herman's body in a ditch. Brutally beaten and shot twice in the chest, he was naked and stripped of all belongings. The crime, cruel and symbolic, seemed to carry a message of humiliation and intimidation. The discovery transformed an ordinary weekend into a moment of pain and mystery. The autopsy revealed he may have remained alive until just hours before being found, suggesting he spent the night under the control of his attackers. The case quickly gained traction, with conflicting theories of revenge, illicit dealings, and personal secrets, but none of them could ever provide a definitive truth. On the afternoon of Sunday, May 23, 1982, a teenager returning from mowing lawns in Clermont County stumbled upon something that would change his life forever: the body of a man abandoned in a roadside ditch. Shocked, he ran for help, quickly bringing the police to the scene. The officers confirmed the victim's identity. It was Herman Gilbert. His condition revealed extreme violence, severe beatings and 2 gunshots to the chest. Even more disturbing was the fact that he was completely naked. His wallet, watch, personalized belt buckle, and even his boots were missing. Not a single item remained that could have allowed immediate identification. According to some, the nudity was not just to conceal evidence, but also to send a message of humiliation to his family. The autopsy revealed unsettling details. Herman probably did not die on Saturday, but only on Sunday morning. This suggested that he had been kept alive overnight, held captive by his attackers before being executed. For his wife and children, the idea that he endured hours of suffering made the loss even more unbearable. Days later, his van was located in Adams County, about 20 kilometers away. Inside, nothing seemed out of place. Tools, spare parts, and supplies were still there. However, investigators found fingerprints and strands of hair that did not belong to Gilbert. These were promising clues, but the lack of DNA technology at the time prevented real progress. To this day, it remains uncertain whether those traces were ever preserved for modern analysis, leaving a frustrating gap for both the family and those who study the case. In the very first days of investigation, one lead caught the officers' attention: Gilbert's passion for aviation. He owned a small private plane and even had an improvised landing strip on his property. According to Joanne, his wife, a few months earlier, some individuals had approached him with a suspicious proposal to use the aircraft to transport drugs. Herman refused immediately, stating he would never get involved in criminal activities, and even threatened to report them if they insisted. This detail raised the possibility that traffickers, fearing exposure, decided to silence him. The brutal way his body was left behind seemed consistent with that theory, though no solid evidence ever linked the murder directly to aerial smuggling networks. Another line of investigation appeared even more convincing. 3 months before the crime, Vernon, Perman's younger brother, had agreed to testify in a federal case against organized crime members. Always protective, Perman accompanied him to court. Although he was not part of the hearing, he later commented that he felt he was being followed by an unfamiliar man in the corridors. To investigators, this suggested criminal surveillance. The hypothesis was clear. Killing Perman could have been retaliation for Vernon's cooperation with authorities. The stripped body, the excessive violence, and the time gap between his disappearance and death all reinforced that theory. There were even rumors that the murder was intended as bait, to lure Vernon into attending the funeral, making it easier for criminals to locate him. The darkest detail is that he never showed up at the ceremony, precisely because authorities warned him of the possible trap. Among the lines of investigation, one of the most discussed was the possibility of an intimate motive. The decisive detail emerged in Maysville, where Gilbert entered a flower shop shortly before disappearing. He asked specifically for one employee and refused assistance from another, insisting that the other one already knew what he wanted to order. This raised speculation that he was planning to send flowers to a woman outside his marriage. In a small community where rumors spread quickly, the assumption of an extramarital affair gained traction. For some, the murder was seen as an act of revenge by a jealous partner who had discovered the relationship. Perman's charisma and his work inside people's homes only fueled these suspicions, even without concrete proof. When detectives delved deeper into the so-called crime of passion angle, they found no evidence to support the town gossip. Close friends insisted that Perman was devoted to his wife Joanne and to their children, showing no signs of infidelity. Moreover, no witness ever presented solid proof of a parallel romantic involvement. The flower shop episode may well have been nothing more than a trivial request, misinterpreted by others. Still, the rumor circulated widely, distracting attention from more consistent hypotheses. For investigators, the conclusion was clear. Without new facts, the theory amounted to nothing more than speculation. In the end, it was filed away as unfounded gossip, though it left a mark, a reminder of how even the private life of a victim can become the target of public suspicion in an unsolved case. Despite years of investigation, none of the three main theories, drug trafficking, organized crime, or a personal motive, could be definitively proven. The hypothesis of retaliation against Vernon remains the most accepted, as it best explains both the brutality of the murder and the humiliating way the body was left. Yet the absence of concrete evidence, the loss of key traces over time, and the death of potential suspects buried any real chance of resolution. For Joanne and the 4 children, the pain of injustice became permanent, along with the memory of a man described as honest, simple, and dedicated. The case of Perman Gilbert left an entire town marked by silence and unanswered questions. Decades later, in 2009, another mystery would surface, this time on the cold shores of Ireland. Like Gilbert, the man who would come to be known as Peter Bergman was found without a clear identity, surrounded by questions no one could answer. The difference, however, was striking. In the Irish case, the protagonist seemed to have planned his disappearance in life, erasing all traces before death. From a brutal crime in Ohio to an enigmatic death in Sligo, the 2 episodes share the same thread: the emptiness left behind when truth never comes. On the morning of June 16, 2009, the calm of Ross's Point Beach in Northwest Ireland was shattered by a vision that would stay with those who saw it forever. A father jogging alongside his son noticed the still silhouette of a man lying on the damp sand. The scene was unsettling in its strangeness, There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no visible injuries. The body appeared arranged, almost as if in rest, yet nothing in his pockets or clothing revealed his identity. When police arrived, they confirmed that even the clothing labels had been carefully removed. No wallet, no documents, no keys were found. It was as if someone had erased every trace that could lead back to who he truly was. Investigations revealed that just days earlier, on June 12th, the man had checked into the Sligo City Hotel under the false name of Peter Bergman. He paid in cash, provided a fake address in Vienna, and presented no identification. Staff described him as polite, discreet, with short graying hair and a Central European accent, likely German. During his stay, he followed a peculiar routine. Each morning, he left with a purple plastic bag full of objects and always returned with it empty. Police believe he systematically discarded his belongings in different trash bins across the city, making recovery impossible. Every move seemed calculated, from the choice of hotel to the methodical disposal of personal items, as if determined not only to vanish physically, but also to erase himself from the documentary memory of the world. During the weekend leading up to his death, Peter Bergman was seen at various locations around Sligo. On Saturday, June 13th, he entered a post office and purchased international stamps, suggesting he intended to send letters, perhaps farewells. However, no correspondence was ever traced. Witnesses recalled him as polite, yet distant, always keeping to himself. He spent time in cafes, smoking and reading notes scribbled on small pieces of paper, which he later tore up and discarded. The behavior appeared ritualistic, as if each action carried a deliberate purpose, eliminating traces of who he really was. On Monday, June 15th, Bergman checked out of the hotel at around 1:30 p.m. He carried only a black shoulder bag, the purple plastic bag, and a medium-sized suitcase. The smaller luggage he had originally arrived with had already disappeared, likely discarded like his other possessions. He headed to the bus station where he had coffee, read more notes, and once again destroyed the papers. That afternoon, he boarded a bus bound for Ross's Point Beach. There, he walked calmly, greeted strangers, and seemed serene. He was last seen shortly before midnight, standing alone by the water's edge. The next morning, his body lay on the sand, ending an enigmatic sequence of calculated acts that left more questions than answers. When Peter Bergman's body was examined, the results astonished even the most seasoned professionals. At first glance, he appeared healthy, a middle-aged man who seemed to take care of himself and carried a dignified posture. But the autopsy uncovered a devastating reality. Bergman was suffering from terminal prostate cancer, with metastases spread through bones and organs. There was also evidence of previous heart complications, showing that he had long lived with serious health limitations. The most striking discovery, however, was the complete absence of medication in his system. No painkillers, no drugs for relief, not even palliative treatments were detected. This meant that he had endured excruciating symptoms without pharmaceutical aid. To doctors, it appeared to be a deliberate decision, as though he was determined to face his final days without assistance. The report also ruled out drowning. His lungs contained no seawater, making it unlikely that he had submerged until losing consciousness. The most probable conclusion was that he suffered cardiac arrest while entering the cold sea, or perhaps even while standing on the shore, weakened by the advance of his illness. No bruises, cuts, or signs of violence were found, virtually eliminating homicide as a possibility. Officially, it was a natural death. Yet the context was anything but ordinary. Bergman's calculated erasure of his identity, the disposal of his belongings, and the meticulous staging of his final days turned the case into a puzzle that continues to intrigue investigators and the public alike. The official response began with the basics. Fingerprints and DNA samples were collected and compared against national and international databases, including alerts for missing persons throughout Europe. Nothing matched. Investigators retraced his movements. On June 12th, he had arrived in Sligo from Derry, checked into the Sligo City Hotel paying cash, and provided a Viennese address that turned out to be entirely false. Surveillance cameras captured only scattered movements, but in 2009, the city lacked the kind of omnipresent monitoring common today, leaving many gaps in the timeline. The routine with the purple plastic bag indicated systematic disposal of belongings in different trash bins, making recovery of any identifying material virtually impossible. On June 13th, he purchased airmail stamps, suggesting he may have sent letters, perhaps his final messages, but no correspondence was ever traced. Witnesses, including taxi drivers and hotel staff, described him as courteous and reserved, though always distant. The hotel's failure to request identification, a breach of its own policy, gave him the perfect opening to disappear into anonymity, frustrating later inquiries. With no name, no background, and no sign of foul play, the case quickly lost momentum. After 5 months of fruitless investigation, authorities formally closed the file. The man known as Peter Bergman remained unidentified. He was buried in Sligo, in a simple, unmarked grave, a silent monument to the erasure he seemed determined to achieve. The most widely accepted theory among researchers suggests that Bergman was a terminally ill man who chose to end his life anonymously. His advanced cancer, bone metastases, and complete absence of medication indicated not only that he was aware of his condition, but that he had consciously decided not to prolong his suffering with treatments. His behavior in Sligo, discarding belongings, cutting labels out of clothing, and registering under a false name, all fit into a plan to sever any link to his true identity. Many believe he sent farewell letters to relatives or close acquaintances, ensuring that only they received the explanations the world would never see. In this scenario, his presence at Ross's Point Beach was not random, but a deliberately chosen setting for the final chapter of a life marked by control until the very end. Yet other interpretations persisted. Some speculated that he might have been a fugitive, a former spy, or someone involved in shady dealings who needed to disappear. His methodical actions, the choice of a foreign country, and the effort to erase all traces fueled these suspicions. More unusual theories suggested an artistic performance or even a silent protest against the bureaucracies of modern life. None of these ideas, however, were ever backed by evidence. Unlike violent crimes, Bergman's death left no perpetrators, only questions. His figure remains a symbol of the fragility of identification systems and the strange freedom of someone who chooses to vanish, even in an age of global surveillance. With the end of the search, the man buried under the false name of Peter Bergman remained one of Ireland's most enigmatic figures. No family ever came forward to claim the body, no authentic documents ever appeared, and no database offered answers. His burial in Sligo symbolized the success of his plan to vanish from the world without leaving a trace. Officially, his death was deemed natural, yet the deliberate preparation turned it into a haunting puzzle. For the local community, the memory that lingered was of a polite stranger who moved among them for a few days, greeted passers-by, and then disappeared into absolute silence. The enigma became a reminder that even in a connected society, the limits of investigation are very real. If Bergman's case exposed the fragility of identification systems, the next story revealed the opposite. Collapse not from absence of data, but from an overwhelming flood of code spinning out of control. In August 2012, Knight Capital, a Wall Street giant, faced disaster in less than an hour, a technological meltdown that nearly destroyed it. Unlike a man erasing his life in silence, here machines created a storm of noise so loud it shook the very heart of the financial market. The transition from human mystery to digital chaos demonstrates how, in vastly different scenarios, failures, whether of identity or programming, can expose vulnerabilities few are prepared to face. On the morning of August 5, 2012, the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange marked what should have been just another trading day. For Knight Capital, one of the largest brokerage firms on Wall Street, it would instead become the start of its greatest disaster. Responsible for nearly 17% of all U.S. stock trades, the company acted as a market maker, ensuring liquidity through the use of high-speed algorithms. Within minutes of the market opening, those systems began to malfunction. Algorithms started flooding the exchange with buy and sell orders at uncontrollable speed. In just half an hour, more than 397 million shares were traded erratically, distorting the prices of 154 different stocks. Panic spread across the trading floor as operators realized they were accumulating billions of dollars in unauthorized positions. For 45 chaotic minutes, Knight Capital was trapped in a cycle of automatic trades spiraling out of control. By the time engineers finally shut down the servers, the company had already racked up estimated losses of $440 million. The consequences were immediate. Knight's own shares plummeted by almost 50% in a single day, leaving the firm on the brink of collapse. Regulators, investors, and the entire market looked on in shock as one of Wall Street's pillars unraveled before their eyes. The episode would go down as one of the greatest technological disasters in modern financial history, a grim warning of the dangers of over-reliance on automated systems without safeguards. In the 15th century, Europe faced a dilemma few could have imagined: the absence of precious metals needed to sustain its economy. Gold and silver coins were the foundation of trade, tax collection, and military pay. Unlike today, when central banks can simply print paper money, the medieval system depended entirely on physical metals. As surface deposits became depleted and deeper mining was limited by the technology of the time, supplies fell drastically. This lack of circulating currency paralyzed markets, delayed wages, and left even monarchs struggling to finance their realms. Merchants often reverted to bartering, exchanging goods instead of using coins. The shortage did not arise in isolation. Europe's appetite for imports from the East, spices, silks, and luxury goods, created a trade imbalance. To pay for these products, merchants exported large quantities of silver to the Orient, draining local reserves. The situation worsened after the Black Death in the 14th century, which drastically reduced the labor force available for mining. Long wars drained resources, while the expanding Ottoman Empire cut off vital supply routes, especially in the Balkans. By the 1450s, Europe was in the grip of what historians would later call the Great Bullion Famine. More precious metals leaving the continent than entering, while local production collapsed. Governments faltered, workers went unpaid, and entire communities felt the weight of an economy starved of money. The lack of real coinage drastically altered the functioning of fairs and markets. Without sufficient gold and silver, even simple transactions became complicated. Merchants were forced back into bartering, exchanging goods of equivalent value. While this worked in isolated situations, it was inadequate for an increasingly complex economy. Goods piled up unsold, trade routes shrank, and many merchants abandoned their businesses, unable to sustain long journeys without reliable payment. Even major hubs like Florence and London recorded sharp declines in the circulation of goods. Workers also suffered. Employers struggled to pay craftsmen, miners, and soldiers, often resorting to payments in kind, such as grain or cloth. This practice fueled discontent, since perishable goods lacked the stability of coins. Governments too faced serious dilemmas. With fewer metals available, tax revenue dwindled and treasuries ran dry. Mints cut production drastically, and some rulers resorted to debasement, mixing common metals into coinage to stretch reserves of gold and silver. The result was inflation and widespread mistrust, deepening the sense of instability. The Great Bullion Famine was more than an economic downturn. It disrupted social order, tested governments, and left ordinary people in constant uncertainty about survival. Faced with collapse, necessity drove innovation. New pumps and mining equipment allowed deeper excavation in shafts once thought exhausted, particularly in Central Europe. These efforts uncovered additional silver veins, temporarily reviving regions that had seemed doomed to abandonment. At the same time, the Portuguese played a decisive role along the West African coast. By the 1440s, their caravels were already bringing back gold from Guinea, which helped replenish European mints. This influx provided short-term relief and opened the door to the maritime expansion that would define the late Middle Ages. New routes also reshaped the balance. In 1498, Vasco da Gama's voyage established a direct link with India, reducing Europe's reliance on intermediaries in the east and slowing the outflow of silver. Just a few years earlier, in 1492, Christopher Columbus had reached the Americas, unintentionally triggering a revolution. In the following decades, the rich silver mines of Mexico and Peru would flood Europe with unprecedented wealth. This abundance ended the famine, but created a new challenge: runaway inflation caused by the oversupply of metals. What began as scarcity ultimately gave way to excess, altering the economic foundations of the continent and reshaping global trade for centuries to come. The Great Bullion Famine revealed how fragile economies based solely on gold and silver could be. To cope with the crisis, merchants and bankers increasingly relied on credit instruments, bills of exchange, and sophisticated bookkeeping. These innovations allowed transactions without physical coins, supported instead by trust among trading partners. Merchant cities, particularly in the Low Countries and Italy, became laboratories of financial creativity. This shift marked the first steps toward modern capitalism, proving that scarcity could spark innovation and create more complex systems of credit and exchange. Across history, similar patterns emerge. Herman Gilbert, a victim of unseen forces in Ohio; Peter Bergman, who chose to erase his own identity; Knight Capital, brought down by the failure of its algorithms; and medieval Europe, dragged into chaos by a lack of metals. Each case, in different times and contexts, exposed human, social, or technological vulnerabilities. Together, they show a common truth. When systems fail, whether protecting a man, controlling financial codes, or sustaining an economy, the consequences leave lasting scars. In the end, these stories converge on a single reminder: mystery, failure, and unanswered questions are inescapable parts of the human experience.
Enjoyed this case? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories like this. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Hit the like button to support our work and share this video with fellow true crime fans.